Hey guys, let's talk about the Nikon Z5II. I've had this camera for 5 days and I'm going to talk about in-depth file quality, raw files, and how does it compare with baseline performance in the entry-level pro market, which is set by the Sony A7IV and its cousin, the Sony A7C II. So I have used these two Sony cameras as benchmark just to test them against these two cameras. I could have used my Nikon Z6III, but I think the Nikon Z6III sits at a higher class, although they're in the same price bracket as the A7IV. The Z5II uses a 24.5 BSI CMOS sensor, tweaked and made better, and I found the same kind of color quality and richness of the raw files that I saw from my Nikon ZF, which was amazing because I absolutely love the output of the Nikon ZF. So the stills camera, you have a great win already because the files are fantastic. Let's talk about the build and the feel of the camera. The camera is actually slightly less long than the Z6III. So when you hold the camera, you feel as if it's maybe a little bit of shape drawn from the bottom compared to the Z6III. The Z6III is slightly longer. You can only understand that when you sort of hold them side by side. But I didn't find this to be a problem at all. In fact, I did not even realize that there was a difference in size. Overall, there are more custom buttons this time. There's this beautiful, picture control button here, which I used so much because the button is right here. Otherwise, I would have had to go, inside the menu, the I button, and then find the picture control menu and then change picture controls, picture styles. Here, I just could access the picture profiles quickly and I kept experimenting with them. This is the first time I used a Nikon like a Fuji camera. And a fantastic thing with Nikon is that with the partnership with Adobe and Lightroom is that when you draw these files in onto the Lightroom, you will see the same picture profile is applied there. So you don't have to go and fix it. It's auto applied, which is a great thing. Then I can edit my raw file on top of the picture profile that's applied to the raw file already. It's got IBIS. At this price point, it's $1,700 and about 1.35 lakhs in India. At this price point, there's no other camera that offers you IBIS inside the body. This has got a very bright, large viewfinder. The viewfinder is 3000 nits bright. That's tremendous. That's crazy. It's got a completely full size battery. It's got dual card slots, right? Very important. It's got dual SD card slots. It also got a flip out screen. At this price point, this is the first time that Nikon has launched a flip out screen. It can easily hold big lenses on this mount. I'm very, very happy with how the camera feels and operates. The battery life is fantastic. I went shooting stills entire day. It was not even done 50%. Also, one more thing that you don't get at this price point is a joystick. This camera does have a joystick right here. So it just, like I said that I was comparing this with the Sony A7C II, and the Sony A7C II does not have a joystick. The Sony A7IV has, but it's a much more expensive camera. Okay, and what about the output? So when I got this camera initially, I didn't have the raw files of the Z5II were not opening on Lightroom. Yesterday night, I got an update, which I did on my Lightroom, and now I can read the raw files. I'll talk about that later. But so my first half of the experience was with looking at the JPEG files. The files are really good. They're beautiful colors, and you can actually edit them a bit, which is really, really amazing because you don't expect that out of a JPEG file. First of all, I love the JPEG. Love the color tones, the fact that I could quickly change the picture profiles and experience very interesting creative picture profiles that Nikon has built in this camera. Then I thought, okay, let's go out in the night and shoot some videos. And what's good about that is that I can test low light autofocus performance. I can figure out low light video file performance in the camera. I shot in ISO 800 and ISO 1600 in mixed lighting conditions, in low light conditions. To be honest, when I started to edit, did some basic color grade, the files are fantastic. I did not see any grain at all. At 1600 and 800 ISO in low light conditions. Stabilization worked out very, very well. When I'm moving mostly on the Nikon system, I use IBIS Sport. So that really worked out very, very well for me. I was using the 35 1.8s and the 50 1.4, and both lenses, I know for a fact the 35 1.8 is one of Nikon's best autofocusing lenses, but even the 50 1.4 was no slouch, to be honest. It was quite good, very comfortable to operate, very fast, especially when I'm shooting photos. You know, there are moments that I saw for a split second and just took the shot, and the camera latched onto people, faces, just where I want the camera to focus on. So fast, it was a little surprising and uncanny for me. Now let's talk about file performances, okay? So I did test at 4K 24 the N-Log H.265 420 for Nikon and H.265 422 for Sony A7C II, which is the same as the Sony A7IV. So when I look through the files, what I saw was very interesting. At ISO 800 and 1600, both performed really well and they were very clean. Remember, the idea of this test was to sort of have a section of the scene which is a little underexposed, and place a person there because you can see what it is that underexposure is doing to the skin, and then also properly expose the highlights, because you have to always expose the highlights properly. So when I did that, very interestingly, till 3200, ISO 3200, the Z5II N-Log reacted nicely, but I could start to see some grain at ISOs 3200. Not anything that you would notice. 800 and 1600 were very clean. Sony did not show any sign of grain at ISO 3200. ISO 6400 onwards, both cameras were showing grains. I felt that the Z5II showed a little more. At ISO 25600, funny enough, the Nikon camera had quite a bit of grain. But understand, we were not shooting in ideal lighting conditions. So was it a matter of ISO performance in log? It is not. Let me explain that to you. When we went out to do the stabilization test, we forgot and we made a mistake, and we actually shot at f8, f11 and at ISO 25600 in N-Log. And we forgot all about it. When we later realized, and then it changed the ISO values back to ISO 800, I expected the ISO 25600 file to not look good at all. But when I put it on the edit and realized there was enough light outside, and at ISO 25600, it gave me remarkable results, fantastic results. So the conclusion is that it's not that high ISO is a problem, it's just that it needs to have good light, enough light. That's basic camera stuff, right? That's how cameras react. So I think in professional scenarios, when people professionally light, for example, I'm shooting right now, I have 2-3 different lights here going on. I'm not going to not light the scene and expect to sort of raise shadows up and not expect any degradation in the image. The question is, once you have lit it well, is the output something that you're happy with? And we were shooting together, we asked people, and everyone who actually saw the Nikon files said they liked the straight out of camera color and tone output of the Nikon, which means that anyone would have to do less changes on the Nikon just because the baseline performance and output is so beautiful. On the Sony, people are not that happy, and they all felt that they needed to change the skin tone a little bit to match them how they look in real life. Let's talk about stabilization again. So we'll replay the stabilization clip one more time here. To be honest, I was using IBIS Sport for Nikon and the normal stabilization IBIS only for Sony. I did not use the EVR because it depends on how much you crop in. So the IBIS performance was so similar, it was crazy. In fact, I thought the IBIS on the Z5II is almost the same as the IBIS on the A7C II, which is vastly improved over the A7IV's IBIS performance. So this is great to know, but I think the IBIS normal will appear slightly more stabilized, but in any situation, the Z5II gives you fantastic industry standard IBIS performance. Let's now talk a little bit about the dynamic range in photos, because I think that's another area that's very important. So initially, we did not have access to the raw files. So we thought, okay, let's just look at how the ISO performance is. By the way, dynamic range is not the same as ISO performance, but they're related. At this point, we're talking about the ISO performance, okay? So we realized that even when it comes to JPEGs, the way the Nikon files maintain color accuracy and also maintains a very minimal level of grain. It was amazing. At 12,800, 25,800, 51,200, consistently the Nikon files did better than the Sony JPEG files. Especially you should use the Nikon, I think, fine star files in JPEG. But then yesterday I could actually use the raw files, and the funny thing is that in raw file the difference is less, but you could still see a little bit of difference in terms of grain. You get slightly higher grain on the higher megapixel Sony A7C II and A7IV sensor at, let's say, 25,600. But let's say when you're normally shooting within the range of 100 to 3200, right, you're not going to see much difference in the file quality of the A7IV, A7C II and the Z5II. So the Z5II matches the industry standard very, very well in RAW, and exceeds the industry standard like way beyond anyone else when it comes to JPEG file quality. Because see, in most situations when you're shooting, you need to send the output out quickly. You're mostly using the JPEG files because it also takes less space. You're taking in the JPEG files, doing basic corrections, a little bit of highlight recovery, a little bit of color toning, and then you're sending the file out to your client. That's what regular life looks like. And in those situations, the Nikon is just so much better than the Sony. Let's not talk about low light autofocus performance, and that was a very surprising thing for us. The low light autofocus performance for Nikon is fantastic. It really picked up the eye, no problem at all. And then when we kind of recovered the shadows from the JPEG files, it did very well. The Sony A7C II did almost same in terms of autofocus in low light, but JPEG file could not recover any detail. It went all strange and green. Let's talk about autofocus performance otherwise when it comes to speed. Like if you're burst shooting, how does the Sony compare with the Z5II? The A7C II has a dedicated AI chip. The A7IV doesn't. So I shot it on the A7C II. On the A7C II, it took at a burst 6 frames a second, 14-bit RAW files. I could get only 19 shots. 14-bit RAW files, 11 frames a second on the Nikon Z5II. I got 50 shots in the same span of time. So obviously, because of the higher FPS on the Nikon, you can go up to 11 frames per second with full RAW. You're getting more shots. Out of those 50 shots, 42 shots were in focus. But on the Sony, out of the 19 shots, all were in focus. I would say the Z5II is a winner because you got more shots in focus, because you could shoot more. By the way, look at the buffer performance of the Nikon Z5II here. That's crazy. I think I held it up for about 5, 6, 7 seconds, which tells you the amount of, and by the way, I'm only using a pretty basic, SanDisk 128GB V30 card. If you're going to use a V90 card, you're going to get even better buffer, which is fantastic. So deeper buffer, more shots, and you're shooting at 11 frames per second. By the way, in JPEG, you can shoot up to 30 frames per second as well. So overall, when it comes to autofocus performance in stills, I have to give the advantage to the Nikon Z5II. What about shooting through obstacles? Often it happens you're shooting through a window and the person is behind the window, and we have these obstacles or rod or other things in front on the window, right? So you have to shoot through that. Sony was a standard for a long time, and I think the Z6 III and the Z8 matched the Sony standard recently in the last 2 years, and now the Z5II, I felt as if it did slightly better. It really latched onto the person, back of the head also. It's not the eye. He was not looking towards the camera. It picked up the back of the head of the person, and immediately, I could take the shot. Yes, when I kind of refreshed the scene again, it did latch on to what was in front of the camera, but then it was very easy for me to shake it off. With a little bit of time, it went back to the person. On the Sony, I had to use the touch screen to get it to focus on the person. So that's the difference. I think shooting through obstacles, it has drastically improved on the Nikon. Let's talk about video autofocus. Video autofocus is really smooth. Both cameras are really neck to neck, to be honest. I didn't see any difference, both for object and for human. If a person is walking up to you or walking away from you, suddenly coming in the scene, going out of the scene, those situations, the video autofocus was actually neck to neck, and I didn't change any settings on both these systems. Let's now talk about overall performance then. We have spoken a lot. We've really dove deep into the conversation on Nikon Z5 II and this one. What is interesting for me is how the Nikon Z5 II is priced. To be honest, it takes a much more expensive camera sensor. It's a 24.5 megapixels PSI CMOS sensor. You have IBIS. You have more custom buttons than ever. With all those things, and you get, by the way, I haven't told you yet, there is a 12-bit RAW on the Nikon Z5 II. Yes, there is a 4K 60 crop on both the Sony A7IV, Sony A7C II and the Z5 II. Overall, at this price point, I don't see anyone else competing with the Z5 II, and I think this is the best full-frame camera for the lowest amount of money. There is nothing that you actually don't get on this, and if there's so many people making the A7IV as the trusted main pillar of a camera, and they're figuring out a way with the 4K 60 crop, that tells me at a price that's so much lower, the Z5 II is a better buy. Because what can you do with it? You can go for a 50 1.4. This lens that I shot with, beautiful lens. Okay, the 1.4 lenses for any other system are much more expensive, 2 or 3 times more expensive. The 50 1.4 is beautiful. It gives you a classy, artistic look. That 1.4 bokeh, very good autofocus. And to be honest, these lenses start getting perfect f2 onwards. So you can get that lens, you can get another maybe f2 40 millimeters or f2.8 28 millimeters, any of these lenses, and then get the camera at the same price as a Sony A7IV body, for example. So any which way you look at it, either you pay the same amount for a A7C II, but you have compromises like he doesn't have 1/8,000th of a second shutter. The Nikon Z5 II has. The A7C II doesn't have a properly full mechanical shutter. It has only a electronic front curtain shutter, a tiny EVF. This has got a gorgeous, large, bright EVF. So any which ways you look at it, you either pay the same but get less, or pay less and get as much as a camera that sits at a higher price point. A full-size body, fantastic IBIS, tremendous autofocus, color quality, output in both video and photo. This is by Nikon a masterstroke. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you're looking forward to the Z5 II. What's your opinion on this? If you like this content, please subscribe to the channel. If you don't like this content, please hit the subscribe button. I'm going to see you soon. Help me reach 8,000 subscribers. See you.